All right. Hello, everyone. A very good morning to all of you if you're joining us from Singapore, and to the rest of you who are joining us from anywhere else in the world, a very good afternoon or good evening to all of you. Once again, we would like to welcome all of you to day 2 of GeekCamp 2021. So, as we kick off day 2, right, once again, I'd like to call out the organizing committee over here, right, with Will, Luther, myself, Dina, Adam, Hongking, Stephanie, Ambrose, and Fazli. I'd like to say, big thank you for all of you for joining us. I know it's early in the morning, right? So today with me, we also have Ambrose, who is also my fellow MC. And Ambrose, why don't you tell us a little bit more about this platform that we are all in today, just in case some of our attendees have not joined us yesterday. Ambrose.
Okay, so we have 3 rooms: the main hall, the social room, and the adventure room. In the adventure room, there's a little invisible maze you can navigate and play with. And then in the social room is where you can meet other participants and speakers in the space. You can also have conversations with them and play some games. So you can find one of those game tables and then press the X key to play the game at the game table. And then after that, you can exchange the game codes with whoever you wish to join the game. And most importantly, we have all the talks happening right here in the main hall. And only presenters are allowed on stage, so please don't walk up and interrupt the session. Also, don't stand on the red square with the Q&A icon, and we'll explain the Q&A process later. For that, let's go to our code of conduct. So it's pretty simple. Just do not harass other participants. And if you're being harassed, witness harassment, or have other concerns, please send a direct message to the organizers. Our names start with the GM prefix, which stands for Game Master. And the organizers will take appropriate action. Okay, so if you want more information about the event, check out our website or GeekcampSG. You can also check out our schedule there. And then we have the Twitter. Follow us on the Twitters at GeekCamp. And then we also have Instagram at GeekcampSG and Facebook as GeekcampSG. And most importantly, our YouTube channel, GeekcampSG Rocks. Please subscribe so that you can catch all the presentations that you missed, if you missed any. All recordings will be there. And finally, a shout out to our contributors for their continuous support for making this possible. So we have Chun Ki, Michael, Jian, Harish, Thomas, and Christopher Tay. And then a shout out to our stream sponsor, ProLive, who are helping us with the streaming and recording of this event. Finally, for the Q&A, we'll be using the mic situated audience. So if you see right in front of the stage, there's a mic stand there. And so you have to line up on the blue footprints. And then me or Terence will invite you to ask your question to the speaker directly. And then when we do that, please tap on the red square in front of the mic. And then once you're done, please move aside too. And then additionally, if you don't prefer to ask your question vocally, you can use our pigeonhole. It's pigeonhole.at/GeekcampSG 2021. The link is also found in the pinned messages on the top left corner. And with that, let's just jump into our first talk, which is by Dimitri Viniki, open source advocate at Facebook, and he'll be presenting on the 10,000 steps of open source project health. So he'll be talking a bit about how the Facebook open source team uses these methods to keep track with their open source projects and make sure that their outcomes are great from them. Okay, with that, because he's unable to be to present this live to us, so we have a pre-record video he sent us, and we're playing it. And hopefully, if he's around, he can answer some questions. I'll have to check with that later. And with that, I would hand over the time to his video recording. Give me a moment. And
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining my session today. My name is Dmitry Vinik, and I'm a developer advocate on the Facebook open source team. Today, I'll talk about measuring open source project health and how to improve it. So let's go. As I said, we're going to discuss measuring open source project health and how to improve it, or I also call this presentation the 10,000 steps of open source project health. So first of all, I'd like to try to establish my credibility and talk about what I do. I'm currently, as I mentioned, open source developer advocate at Facebook, and we have opensource.fb.com where you can find lots of content from our team. You can find our portfolio of open source projects, our blog, our YouTube channel, our podcast, many different things. But ultimately, our goal is to empower diverse communities through open source technology. I myself focus on mobile pillar at the moment, on projects for Android and iOS native, and also hybrid mobile projects like React Native, for instance. Litho, that helps you to build UI declaratively for Android. Fresco, a project to help manage images for Android, and also Flipper that allows people to freely debug mobile applications. And it's just 4 out of many other projects that are part of our portfolio for mobile. But more importantly for today is that I am passionate about open source, and that's why I'll be talking about it today. And it's not just about Facebook open source. It's more broadly covering open source as a whole. While some context is important, this presentation might not fit projects that are only led by one or two people, while I'm still having expectations of a certain scale, like a team behind a project or a company, and that's what I will be giving some insight into from my experience. So first, I'd like to quickly talk about what is open source. And it's a process of making technology available for others to use and improve. And the last two words are the most important ones, use and improve, meaning that we are looking for two main personas at least, our users of open source, and contributors, those who help us improve the project, those who help contribute back to the project. And that's very important to keep in mind. And that's what defines open source. But why people contribute to the open source? Why companies contribute to open source? First, it's the community. People are looking for that community behind the project because it's really what at the very core of open source. Leadership. If you are creating open source project and you are leading it, or you are participating as one of the core contributors to the project, you become you have an important role in that industry, in that area, whether it's AI, ML, mobile web. And that's why, again, corporations often contribute to open source. Productivity. You have people from different backgrounds, extremely diverse communities in some cases, that help improve your project. You might not think about some accessibility issues, for instance, because your team hasn't had experience with that. And people in open source will be able to do that for you. So it's one of just examples of how productive you can get with open source. But also important thing to keep in mind, it's branding. It can help you with recruitment. It can help with just elevate your brand as a company. There are some enterprise organizations that entirely built on open source, and that's where branding come into play. And if you'd like to see more and hear more about this topic of why people contribute to open source and what open source is, you can watch this Explain Like I'm 5 video, part of our ELI 5 series on Facebook open source YouTube channel, where we covered open source as a topic. So how do people contribute to open source? Some of the things, and I'll talk about that in length, is through source code, actually making changes to the code base. Some are through documentation, and it's very important. Every contribution matters, whether it's changing the piece of code or changing something in documentation. And that's what it's important for people to contribute, whether they know how to code or not. Translations. Even if you don't see how you can improve the project right now, maybe you have some second language that you know that you can help translate documentation. And also testing. People often focus on development and forget about testing, but testing is what drives software development lifecycle. That's where it helps us to maintain software, and that's why it's very important for open source. And you can contribute there to the open source project as well. And if you'd like to see more about contributing for the first time, you can watch another video on our YouTube channel on contributing to open source for the first time by Cami Williams. So, but in particular for this presentation, what are we trying to achieve? What is our goal? So our goals is defining gaps in the open source project health, providing some guidelines. I don't believe in dogmatism. I don't believe on following things that just particular step-by-step instructions, especially for open source. Every project is different. So I'm only going to give you some guidelines that you can follow. And more importantly, is throughout this whole presentation, the one thing that will be clear is that communication is a key on every step. So Facebook open source. Based on the experience that I've had, is there some metrics that you can define open source health for everything, for every project out there? And the short answer is no. The long answer is, as every consultant would say, it depends. There is some metrics, obviously, that you can use. The potential health metrics like repo numbers, whether it's stars, watchers, forks on the GitHub or GitLab repository. It's your forums like Reddit, Stack Overflow, or other Q&A chats that you can collect sentiment analysis, or just seeing how many questions people ask and how interactive people are. Twitter and YouTube, or other, again, areas where people can talk to each other, whether it's Slack or Discord. And there is also something called Orbit model. Orbit is basically the model behind this great website, I believe, Orbit, that helps people to try to define some metrics and grow the communities through quite prescriptive methodologies that I invite you to give a try, but I'm not going to go dive deeper into that here. So instead of looking at numbers and this particular metrics, I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'll talk about more conceptual approach, what things to look for, what kind of guidelines I can give you to hopefully find what works for you and improve your project. So that's why I'm covering guidelines today. And it's not, as I said before, it's not about Facebook, but I'm still thinking about large scale. So in general, there are 5 types of open source work you can think of. And the types of work that we'll discuss are planning, branding, documentation work, and code-based work, source code work. So let's go one by one. Let's look at planning first. Why do we want to open source project in the first place? Open sourcing project for the sake of open sourcing is not a reasoning. You have to know exactly why you're open sourcing something and how you're going to wind it down eventually. Are you going to have a world domination, or are you going to sunset or archive it down the line? Think of that. Maybe you're going to move it to a foundation or do something with it. You have to keep that in mind at the very first stage of open sourcing. Before you even open source, at the time of launch, you have to have a plan behind your actions. Possible goals that one can have and should kind of acknowledge is recruiting. You're trying to recruit people to your organization, or even maybe to your project through that open source work that you're sharing. Contributions. You're actually looking for people to contribute and improve your project that you are going to use internally, maybe, or as an enterprise supporter of the project. Branding. Again, that's very important, as maybe you're trying to position yourself as an organization, open source organization as well. And adoption. You're actually trying to dominate the market or maybe become a big player in the market. And that's where, another UI framework might come into play, and it would be a good example. Always think long term. But the important thing overall is that you have to have your team's commitment. Whoever is behind the project, at least especially initially, you need to know that they are doing it they have a passion for it. They have a commitment to support it. They have on call if there are some GitHub issues that pop up or PRs. How fast will you review them? Think of it in the enterprise terms, like you have a SLA. Basically, you have expectation to reply to folks online within a week, maybe a month, maybe a year even, but still have that expectation set with your team ahead of time. When it comes to branding basically, is not just about marketing. We're not thinking marketing as it's usually said. Marketing often is viewed negatively. Instead, it's really about showing commitment from your project. When you actually think about branding a bit more, branding, you can think of naming. You actually thought of a name. You did some research. You Googled that. when you, let's say, have some common name, Pandora, for example, and you try to Google for it, and you see Pandora is the jewelry store or common brand that people have, and search engine optimization will downgrade your project way down the line. So you have to think about proper name, especially when it comes to packaging as well, like npms or some Python packages. Logo, even if you're not trying to pay some expensive designer to create a logo for you, something easily drawn by you or your team, actually exciting, maybe get community involved and draw a logo for your project. Have a narrative. How are you going to position your project? What is it for? What problem it's solving? Document it in a README. That really shows your commitment. Branding is one of the ways we are seeing the commitment from the project. And social media, maybe you don't have to actually have a Twitter account or Facebook account, but maybe reserve a name for you, so your project can be shared with the community where your community resides. Maybe it's an email list, because your community primarily uses emails, so think of that too. For documentation work, documentation is one of the cornerstones of open source. If you look at the top projects just worldwide, they all have amazing documentation. People spend hours and hours, days and months, years on making sure it's as good as possible, as accessible as possible, as welcoming as possible. So it's really what often makes or break the project. Documentation, it's great for contributions, especially first-time contributions. It makes it searchable. People can actually find it on Google or elsewhere, or even on a website. That's where a website is quite handy. And again, creating the website helps people to find your project, not just on a README and just markdown files on your repository. It's limiting. But a website with a search bar and some quick guidance, frequently asked questions, really sets project apart from many others out there. Consider using Alex.js. Alex.js finds unwelcoming words that you might be using, biased language, things of that sort that really helps. This Alex.js linter helps you to find and exclude from your documentation. So do things of that sort. Make it welcome, make your project welcoming to other, more diverse backgrounds. The last part that open source work that I want to cover is code base. The code base, the important things to mention are code of conduct. You want to make sure that your community has code of conduct established that kind of guides how the community behaves, how you deal with bad actors, how you navigate some conflicts, or what you establish as the environment in your project. And there are lots of great examples of where to grab the code of conduct from. README is what people first see on GitHub or GitLab. So make sure that one is well defined. You explain what you're looking for, why it's there. So it's very important to have proper README for your project. Have contributors guide. If you are looking for contributions, you should have a contributors guide, so they know how to get started, how to build your project on their local machine, how to have it in development mode, how to make the pull requests, have a pull request form for them, a template, if you're using GitHub, for example. And again, PRs and issues, it has to be part of the contributors guide, but as I mentioned, have a template. With GitHub, you have a great way to establish what you're looking for when someone files a pull request or an issue. You don't want to have a back and forth with whoever filed one of these items on if it's a failure of a test, what's your reproduction steps? What did you expect to happen? What actually happened? Make sure you define that, and because if there is some vagueness, it usually will be filled with the confusion or just back and forth. You want to avoid back and forth. Maintenance cost of open source is actually quite high, and that's where problems usually arise, and it makes your project health worse. So keep that in mind. So we talked about planning, branding, docs, and code base, quite a few things. But last but not least thing I want to mention is the community work. It's a thing of its own, and it's important on every level of open source work, and that's why I kind of define it as a separate thing. It's team driven. It really has to come from your overall team. Often it's focused on content. So make sure that the community knows your team. They know where they contribute, how to learn your projects, things like tutorials, videos, podcasts. It again goes back to branding even, but make room for others to produce that content. That's always exciting to see in some space, especially web space, how many tutorials people outside of the company or a team that originally created the project created. That again, content driven by the community is always best. Have a community space, place for people to congregate, to connect with each other, ask questions. Have a Slack channel, Discord channel, place for people to go and see the team that behind the project. Ask a question, and if you actually see more questions popping up in those spaces, move them to frequently asked section on your website, on your documentation. So everything is interconnected with your community, because open source is all about the community. And communication is the key. If you don't tell your project contributors or users what to expect, they might abandon you. They might abandon the project. And it's the lack of the communication usually leads to disaster. So I've talked about many things here. Call for action that I would like to leave you with. Focus on communication. It's extremely important to talk to your audience, know exactly what they're expecting. Maybe share your roadmap. Share exactly that you're not expecting contributions or you're looking for contributions. What stage your project is in. Is it production ready or is it still in beta, alpha, whatever it might be? Make sure you clear that up with the community that you are trying to reach. But know your community. That's maybe you are in a space that well known, or it's a brand new space like blockchain or NFT, whatever it might be. Really know who you're working with and who you're building for, and that's where you target them with community space. Maybe again they're using email lists only, or they're only using Slack or Discord, whatever they might be using. So know where your community is at. And still, even though I said metrics and numbers, it's hard to define. Collect that metrics. Down the line, you'll see some patterns that will hopefully align with your project, with your community, and you can actually define metrics and success criteria for you and your team. So thank you, everybody. My name is Dmitry Vinnik. Please reach me on my Twitter, blog, LinkedIn, or email me directly if you have any questions, and I'm excited to you working on open source and thinking of how to improve it. So thank you so much for your time.
All right. All right. Thanks, Dimitri, for this great talk. Does anyone have, so since like he's not here, so I don't think we'll be able to take questions for him. So for now, let's have a short break. Give me a moment. So this talk was pretty short. Let's have a break until 9:50, where we'll have the next talk, Everyone's a Player in a Mid-90s MUD by Kenzie Woodbridge. I think that's going to be pretty interesting. I personally am looking forward to it. So we'll be having 20 minutes, 25 minutes of break. So see you around. I think we have the games room, so y'all can go there and play some games, or y'all can just congregate around and talk about anything. And so see y'all back at 9:50. And that's it for me. Hey everyone, welcome back. Apologies for earlier. I think we made some changes to the space and we kicked everyone out. Sorry for that. Hopefully everyone joins back us right now. If you have friends who are trying to join, you can ask them to reload the page. And I think it should not prompt for a password anymore. Yeah, again, sorry about that. Hopefully everyone joins back, and then we'll begin again at 9:50. Thanks.
everyone, once again, a very good morning if you're joining us from Singapore, and in case you're joining us from anywhere else, a very good afternoon or good evening to all of you. So yeah, I know people are kind of streaming in. I know it's kind of a little bit early on a Sunday morning in Singapore if you're coming from Singapore. We're actually going to kick off our next talk by Kenzie Woodbridge very shortly, right? So just hopefully you guys are coming in, settling in. We look forward to our next talk. Just take the opportunity to linger around, have some fun in this new environment. Right, this is kind of something new that we are doing this year in a virtual world, right? Gather Town. So yeah, we'll see all of you in about 5 minutes time. So settle in and catch you in a bit. once again. It's 9:50 a.m. here in Singapore time. So we are really excited to comment on our next talk, right? So joining us today all the way from Canada, right, is Kenzie Woodbridge, and we're really excited to have her to share with us a little bit on her talk titled "Everyone's a Player in the Mid-90s MUD," right? So it's really exciting, right? Kenzie joins us all the way from British Columbia Institute of Technology as a senior system analyst, as a web developer, as a knowledge strategist, and also a community manager. Right, so she's going to bring to us a really inspiring talk. She's also known for her passion for communication, continuous iterative improvement, and for systemic solutions to systemic problems. Right, I'm going to steal the thunder from her. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Kenzie on stage to share with us an inspiring talk. So over to you, Kenzie.
Thank you. So hello, GeekCamp Singapore. My name is Kenzie Woodbridge, and my pronouns are they and them. I want to start by gratefully acknowledging that I'm speaking to you today from the Pacific coast of Canada, where I live, work, and learn on the traditional unceded territory of the Musqueam and Tsleil-Waututh Indigenous peoples. I am excited to be talking to you today about three of my favorite things: people, obscure academic theory, and technical documentation. So here's my plan. First, context and definitions are always useful. Then I will offer up a few, caricatures of the people you might find in any technical organization or project. I'll introduce you to player type theory and talk just a little bit about the history of online games. Then I'll try to connect that theory back to the folks I introduced you to and to documentation, and I'll finish up by identifying some of the challenges and strategies and offering up some possible solutions and strategies that this application of this theory suggests. Also, I hope to make you laugh if I can, because honestly, we all need a bit of that at the moment. So context is important. In addition to my primary career, which, as Terrence said, is as a knowledge manager and technical trainer, among other things, at the British Columbia Institute of Technology, I'm also a communication scholar and researcher, which means I like to talk about context and the way it helps us to create meaning. So I should also say that when I'm talking about documentation, firstly, I just want to let you know that my bias is that documentation is awesome. Docs are awesome. But also, I'm probably using a broader definition than you're used to. For me, and for this talk, the category of documentation includes developer and user documentation and manuals, knowledge bases, and so on. The things you probably expect, but it also may include things like code comments, embedded help, UI text, even decision logs and meeting minutes. For our purposes today, it's all documentation, okay? So documentation is used by and created by people. So I'm going to start by sketching out a few personas that you will probably know pretty well. Just a word of explanation around naming. When I was writing this talk, I realized that I didn't want to accidentally tie any particular characteristic to any particular ethnic group or gender, so I decided to name my personae for cruciferous vegetables, all of whom, of course, use singular they, them pronouns like I do. So let's start with Sprout. Brussels Sprout, or Sprout for short, is an experienced support desk person. Sprouts love their job because they enjoy helping people solve problems. They have a very good understanding of end users, including what users want to do and how well they can do it. They have significant general technical skill, but they're often person-helping specialists rather than technical specialists. I'm hoping we all know and love, and perhaps even are, in fact, Sprouts here in the room. Then we've got Turnip. Turnip could be any number of different technical specialists, but for this example, let's say that Turnip is a server administrator. Turnip loves knowledge, but Turnip does not like interacting with users. To Turnip, users exist to justify the existence and maintenance of servers, and my friends, those servers are beautiful, even if we are maybe not all equipped to appreciate that beauty. Turnips can be a bit openly dismissive of people who can't understand what a server configuration means just by looking at it. If you're not going to spend the hours that Turnip has put in really learning everything there is to know about it, you don't really deserve to have the information handed to you on a plate. Perhaps this sounds familiar? Yeah. Kale. Kale's very popular these days. Somehow, if there are 15 projects on the go, Kale is always going to be right at the head of the most exciting and buzzwordy project. Kale is here to implement remote software delivery in 6 weeks. Going serverless? Look no further than Kale. Kale is good at quickly acquiring the necessary skills to make something happen, but their understanding may not extend any deeper than it needs to in order to get it done. Kale likes to win at IT. In service of that, they know how and when to schmooze, and they show up at meetings where important people are. If your office is generally quite informal, they're the one that actually irons their clothes on a regular basis. At the end of the project, their name is at the top of the incomplete list of deserving team members when the kudos get handed out in public. If Kale is on a project, that project must come in on time and on budget. Last but not least, broccoli. Being a broccoli, I suggest, is more of a lifestyle than a technical role. Broccoli can actually have any number of roles in your organization, though usually they have at least a little power over others. They could be a developer, project manager, server or database administrator, support desk coordinator, etc. It's often hard to pin down exactly how technically skilled broccoli is, or what their availability is, or what they're actually responsible for. They may or may not be eager to get involved in projects, but if they are, at some point when it can cause the most stress and anxiety to others, they become a weird, unaccountable bottleneck. Broccoli is great at engineering a situation so that they're causing the problem, but you're the one who will be blamed. I certainly hope that you don't have a broccoli in your workplace, but I'm guessing that most of us have encountered such a person in our career at least once. Now, some of you might be sitting there saying, hold on there, you led us down a garden path with your talk description. This is all vegetables and stereotypes. I'm here to see someone apply an outdated ludic research framework to documentation strategy. Never fear, my friends. We are doing this. So, from talking to a couple of you yesterday, I already suspect many of you already know what a MUD is, and at least a couple have even played one. But for those who haven't, MUD stands for Multi-User Dungeon. MUDs are text-only online multiplayer games. Richard Bartle and Roy Trubshaw created one of the very first MUDs in 1978. MUD popularity likely peaked in the mid to late 90s, which is when I spent my time playing and creating in them, but there are still hundreds online and playable today. The MUD you see me very inexpertly navigating here is actually a version of Bartle and Trubshaw's original MUD called MUD 2. So what is player type theory? Well, in 1996, Richard Bartle, who created the MUDs, published an article in which he described 4 types of players, differentiated by their motivations. He then expanded on his theory in a very weighty tome called Building Virtual Worlds in 2003. The easiest way to explain the types is to sketch out a simple combinatory table. We only need 2 axes. One axis I'll mark as interact at one end and act at the other. I find it helps to think of it as interact with and act upon. The other axis has players at one end and world at the other. Then each of the 4 quadrants is a combination of the 2 traits. So up at the top left, we have the combination of interact and players. These are the folks whom Bartle called socializers. They have fun by interacting, usually pleasantly, with other players in the game. They might play, but they're not playing to win or even to explore. It's the social interaction with other players that interests them. Then over here, we have interact and world. These are explorers. They have fun by gaining in-depth knowledge of the game, its mechanics, the environment. Though they might have the hard-won skill to beat the game, that's not really what's interesting to them. Instead, finding hidden things or understanding game mechanics well enough to exploit them for your own uses is. Down here, we have Act and World. Bartle named these players Achievers, and they have fun by acting on the game world and beating the game. They want to get to the highest level, they want to beat all the quests, they get the best armor, and so on. And then, in the final quadrant, we have Act and People. And Bartle, not one for mincing words, called these players Killers. They have fun by acting on other players, often by disrupting their play, perhaps by killing their characters or destroying what they have built or collected. Those 4 are Bartle's player types. And in his player type theory, Bartle posited both a number of interactions and dynamics that occur between players of various types and suggests ways to design a virtual world to encourage or discourage various players in hopes of finding a stable equilibrium of players in the game to make it sustainable over the long term. Now, caveat time. Before I go on, just in case any of you were starting to get itchy at the idea that there are somehow only 4 types of people in the world. I just want to reassure you, this is obviously a simplistic model, and our identities and motivations are inherently unstable. Bartle himself suggests that players may have different motivations in different contexts, or may progress through all 4 types over time. So don't worry, this isn't about trapping real people in like permanent boxes or anything. It's just a way of looking at the world for a moment. So now it's time for the fun part. We're going to take player type theory, which was developed in the context of game design, and apply it to technical documentation. Applying a theory in this way sometimes lets you find interesting congruences or receive new insights. It's a way of looking at things that you know well from a new angle. And if you're a communication scholar, this is also the kind of thing you do for fun, which is to say, invite me to all of your parties. I'm great at parties because I like to talk about this stuff. I don't know, maybe that's good. All right, so when I was reading Bartle's work on player types, I noticed something. Although Bartle was writing about playing a game and the kind of things that motivate individuals to play it, he sure mentioned documentation an awful lot. And that's especially true when he talks about the differences between the top and bottom half of our combinatory on the world side. So interact with explorers versus act on achievers, right? Bartle talks a lot about the difference between a game that you're designing specifically to engage explorers versus one that you're designing to engage achievers. And for the most part, the difference between them relates to documentation of one kind or another. So here's a couple of examples. Emphasizing interacting over acting means designing for explorers. And Bartle says to make the help facilities produce vague information and produce cryptic hints when players appear stuck. Whereas emphasizing acting over interacting means designing for achievers. And Bartle suggests providing a game manual and including automap and autolog facilities. Now, when I read this, it immediately struck me that this might offer a useful insight into a phenomenon that I frequently saw in my workplace. Perhaps you've also seen this. Not all of the time, but at least some of the time. Some of the most specialized and expert people are also the people who write the least documentation, or who contribute the least to it. This has always puzzled me. But if those deep dive specialists are motivated in their work by discovery, by figuring things out, then having proper documentation would actually take all the fun and enjoyment out of that for them. Doing a difficult thing is only an engaging task worthy of their skills and their attention if there isn't a walkthrough telling them, each and every step along the way. They can work and even thrive in an environment with poor or no documentation because it's engaging and interesting. This made me start thinking about applying the model to my work environment. So let's go back to our combinatory again. I'm going to modify it just slightly for the workplace application. I'm going to leave interact and act just as they are, but I'm going to swap out players for users. Then I'm going to swap out world for technology. Now, let's bring back the personas I talked about a few minutes ago. You've probably already guessed from what I just said that I'm proposing that Turnip is an explorer because they like to interact with the technology. Sprout, who enjoys interacting with users, is a socializer. Kale, then, with their love of winning, is an achiever. And yep, that makes Broccoli, the gatekeeper and weird subtle power player of the group, a killer. So what does this schema mean for technical documentation? Well, we all can and should document at least some of the things we know because it makes our own work and the work of our colleagues and users easier and more efficient. But how can we make that happen? Well, let's get to the meat of this talk. Okay, docs are for everyone, right? Let's take a tour back through those cruciferous characters and talk about how each of the types is likely to approach documentation and what challenges that might create. Then I'll highlight some strategies suggested by player type theory that have worked for me. So Sprout first. I'm going to suggest to you that since Sprout's focus is on users and meeting users' needs, the Sprouts of the world actually often love documentation because it helps them to solve a user's problem quickly and without missteps. They can send a user to a resource that lets them do self-help, or they can step through it with them in person or on the phone, or Zoom call, whatever. Documentation also helps Sprout to maintain their broad technical experience and knowledge, and they tend to give back to it. As a support desk person, worker in a team, Sprout also often wants to support their colleagues in solving user problems. So if, for example, Sprout figures out a workaround that isn't documented, they will tend to document it. In fact, in my experience, Sprout is a natural documenter. And if Sprout is working in a place without a central documentation repository, or if they are prevented from easily contributing to it, they will be the person with 40 Word documents on their desktop that they can quickly email to a user in need. Here's the challenge. Despite their expertise and knowledge, Sprouts are often undervalued and sit low in the IT workplace hierarchy. So I want to note that in player type theory, Bartle sees socializers as critical elements in a stable game community. He notes that without sufficient socializers in the community, a game's player base will inevitably dwindle. That's because within a game environment, socializers provide an appreciative and companionable audience for explorers and achievers, and reactive prey for killers, which is an uncomfortable thought. In a tech environment, Sprouts can have even more impact, however. In addition to producing their own documentation focused on the actual needs of the users they have contact with, they are appreciative users, testers, and communicators of any documentation that their more tech-specialized colleagues produce. Sprouts are important and even pivotal contributors, so we should take seriously the problem of their marginalization in our organizations and their possible targeting by the killers/broccolis of the world. It's worth pointing out that a work environment isn't the same as a game environment. Workers have less freedom to just physically leave if they're bored or harassed, but they can certainly disengage, stop going the extra mile, and stop doing things like writing and maintaining documentation. So how can you help? If you have any power or influence, I suggest a two-front approach: structural support and cultural support. Under structural support, I should say, all of my suggestions actually apply to every type to a greater or lesser degree. First, I suggest you can never go wrong with a structured template. Nothing aggressively and intimidatingly stares down a potential documenter like a completely blank document, right? I actually have more to say about templates, but I'll come back to that in a minute. Second, provide a place for their docs to live that is integrated with the rest of the documentation. This is very useful. Adopt my broad definition of documentation and keep it all together in an organized way. And finally, I suggest that some non-judgmental assistance with editing and publishing could be useful if the person, has the desire to write it, but not necessarily yet the skill. If you are lucky enough to have a specialist writer like me on the team, then that kind of support is just a natural part of that role. But if not, a buddy system could be a good strategy, or social group documentation sprints with a culture of folks being a second reader for each other. You may also need to try to change the culture of your organization. So use whatever influence you have to advocate for Sprouts, and make sure that they are being included where they are being needlessly excluded. If you're in project meetings and there's never anyone there who supports users, ask why not. Ask it often. Get Sprouts in the room because they know things that developers and administrators and project managers don't know. Better than being reactive, of course, is anticipating when there could be opportunities for Sprouts to be involved and then make that happen. And finally, become the local Sprout ambassador. Talk about the good work that they do. Don't let people talk them down in front of you. Thank them for the work that they do publicly in front of others. Basically, what I'm saying is that if you care about documentation, Sprouts are your natural allies. And if they're being dismissed, forgotten, excluded, or discounted, your documentation is going to be worse. Your workplace culture will be less engaging and enjoyable, and supporting your user community is going to be a lot harder. Oh, Turnip. As an explorer, Turnip is motivated by knowledge and likes to have the freedom to explore and figure things out for themselves. Learning and exploring are so central to a Turnip's motivations that they have difficulty imagining that this isn't true of everyone else. Something that I've heard a lot from the Turnips I work with, whom I love, is that they don't want to tell users best practices or guidelines for how to use a tool because the tool is flexible and or intuitive, and users should just spend a bit of time exploring it and figuring out how they want to use it. They appear baffled by users who just want to briefly use technology to accomplish a specific task and move on to the next thing on the list. And if that seems confusing to you also, you may just have figured out what your type is. Then too, Turnip's deep technical experience and knowledge and their respect and reverence for same can also introduce tension into the workplace, where differences in skill level are likely to be common. In my experience, Turnips tend to be quick to judge others against their own knowledge and expectations. This means that for Turnips, Folks who lack experience and knowledge of technology or who aren't interested in exploring the technology for themselves aren't possibly busy people who may be experts in their own domain and just have a lot of work to get through in a day. They're wildly inferior turnips, and surely no amount of documentation will help with that. What it comes down to is that turnips are natural anti-documenters. It doesn't naturally occur to them to write it, and if they document something, it is likely to be reminiscent of the quote I showed you previously, cryptic hints that only another turnip could possibly figure out. And when that doesn't seem to stop people asking them inconvenient and annoying questions, they may just throw up their hands and give up on the documentation entirely. All right. Now, if your goal is documentation that is correct and detailed, then the folklore contained in a turnip's brain is your holy grail, because they're not naturally inclined to document things and because they're busy doing important work. One hopes your documentation process may need to be altered to accommodate them. This is generally worth doing. To get those docs out of them, first, you need to reframe documentation for them. Changing perspectives, looking at things in a new way or from a new angle, can be powerful in changing behavior. If, as a turnip, docs feel either irrelevant or unnecessary or even like cheat guides for posers, avoidance of them is instinctual, and changing that attitude could be very difficult. But let's remember our purpose. We're not necessarily trying to get turnips to read documentation here. We're trying to get them to help create it. So since knowledge and mastery is the motivation for turnips, framing the act of docs creation as a skill, as a domain that they can attain mastery of, is likely to be more effective than just extolling the virtues or necessity of documentation more generally. Docs can also be a way for turnips to, in effect, show off their expertise to others, proving that they are in fact knowledgeable, and perhaps most effectively, show that good documentation can be used to reduce interruptions in their life from lesser beings. This has a broader cultural piece, however, because it will only be convincing if it's actually true. This means that there either needs to be an organizational expectation that it is appropriate to send users to the docs first before escalating users to turnip, and or if you need to increase the scope of what your support workers are permitted to do for users with the support of turnip-written docs. I've seen pushback to both of these strategies, but I've also seen some pretty significant successes as a result of them, and there's usually room for at least incremental improvement there. You'll also want to support turnips' writing efforts. Reduce the barriers that stand in their way. Turnips who know a lot don't actually know what other people don't know. And if left to their own devices and forced to just quote unquote document something, they may not make the best choices. So if you can, identify and prioritize the doc's need, what's needed, and be direct and explicit when asking for it. For example, we need to tell the developers using our product how to turn on the new feature and resolve any conflicts, and we should include a working code sample, is going to be more effective than, hey, could you document that new feature? Provide templates. And then help with the publishing and curation. The information these folks know is useful and necessary, but it's organized in a different way in their heads than it might need to be for your users. This means that at least some of the time you may also need to edit and rewrite some of their documentation for the users. Finally, we all get to choose the hills we are willing to die on, but I'd suggest that winning the fight on consistent use of the Oxford comma with a turnip is not a good use of your time, especially if it prevents them from getting what they know out in an accessible form. Next, Kale. How does Kale relate to documentation? It really depends on how it fits into what they're trying to achieve, because remember, achieving things is what Kales love best. This means that if documentation is part of the criteria that will be used to evaluate the success of a project, it will be a priority for them. Otherwise, it won't. As a documenter, Kales are often opportunists. Kale will happily reuse or repurpose existing documentation, which can be positive or negative. Kale is into big bang launches because that's where the accolades are, but not so much into the incremental improvement or long-term maintenance and support. And as documenters, Kales are inconsistent, in my experience, though they usually love using it themselves. So how to support Kale? Well, first, you want to literally gamify documentation for them. One way to do that is to post the stats on who's doing the doc writing, at least internally. Who wrote the most or most visited this week, this month, this year, who has the greatest proportion of current reviewed docs, and so on. Kale likes to have their name in lights, so maybe consider making the author of docs visible in some fashion, though I admit this might not be desirable in all circumstances. Of course, the biggest gamification strategy I'd suggest is to not let writing documentation be an optional side quest. Having all needed docs in place before launch needs to be a critical success criteria in your projects. It needs to be a standard element in your release plan or project plan. Have clear expectations based on actual needs and ensure that they're in proportion to what's possible. If folks are failing to meet documentation expectations, they may just need more of the supports I'm talking about here. But if they're not even trying, then it's also possible that those expectations are non-existent or alternatively inappropriately complex and unmanageable. Finally, public kudos are important. Thank them in front of others, especially in front of the folks whose judgments matter to their careers or other projects. Once you have them concerned with documentation, you need to support Kale's achievement. One piece of advice I'd offer is to be available on short notice, because that's how the docs in Big Bang launches work, even if it's sometimes inconvenient. Once again, templates are great. Achievers will use them, and it'll make your short notice rush job easier to get through. But if I can offer a word of caution, again, Kales are fans of Big Bang launches of new and exciting things. So if you're not careful, you can end up with them wanting to create a new place for just their docs with every launch. If there was one place to prioritize using your influence, it's definitely in asserting that their docs go in the existing, established, expected place with all the other docs. Maybe sweeten the deal by agreeing to highlight them in some fashion, or at least temporarily. Also, if you can outsource the maintenance of their docs to others, perhaps Sprouts, maybe, you may save yourself many a headache in the future. And so I just wanted to take a moment to talk a little bit more about templates. As I've mentioned here, templates can be useful for almost everyone. And I'm sure most of you are already using templates or encounter templates in various parts of your work, whether documentation or other things as well. But you might want to consider whether you could actually use them more extensively and purposefully. One of the advantages of creating more specific templates is that it makes it easier for others to take advantage of your work and integrate it into project plans. For example, we recently created a new template for a support desk cheat sheet, which is now part of the project plan for launching any new or updated service to our community. The template includes a spot for all of the at-a-glance info that a support desk worker might need about a service offering. Looking for this kind of opportunity to create and use and improve templates in your own work and manage and maintain your blank templates with the rest of your documentation. Oh, hey, Broccoli. Don't worry, I haven't forgotten about you. Back to broccoli. Okay, I'm going to suggest that in addition to their other difficult traits, broccolis are often predictably terrible at documentation, not because of lack of ability, but because information is power. So controlling information is also power. If something is well documented, it makes it possible for others to avoid broccoli's influence. Paradoxically, however, broccoli may occasionally add to the existing documentation. When doing so, lets them show a coworker up in front of others. For example, I promise you, however, that they will never, ever, ever review or update existing documentation, ever. Broccolis are inconsistent documenters and elements of destructive chaos. They are also, not to put too fine a point on it, they are bullies, right? So maybe I was avoiding dealing with broccoli for a moment there with my digression about the templates, but I shouldn't have. And that's actually part of my advice to you. I sincerely hope you're not having to deal with broccolis, but if you are, then deal with them. Avoiding addressing the problem only makes it worse. And if you must work with a suspected broccoli, then player type theory suggests a few strategies you can use. First, you want to protect yourself and the other vulnerable members of the team. Not just because these strategies can help with actually getting documentation done, they potentially can, but because, and I'm not joking at this point, work matters. Your experience of it matters, and you are worth protecting. So only talk to broccolis in public. Don't let them collar you in a quiet hallway or a one-on-one Zoom meeting and make commitments for which there are no witnesses. Document everything. Ironically, if you do have a verbal conversation about a project, follow up with an email in which you reiterate what everyone committed to. Don't go it alone, and don't let anyone else go it alone either. Seek out allies and also check in with your colleagues, especially remote, about how they're doing. In particular, as regards allies, Bartle suggests that explorers are the natural enemy of killers, so get a turnip involved. They know enough to keep broccolis in line and to pierce through their lies. And if a broccoli's behavior is nearing or crossing the line of professionalism and collegiality, talk to your manager or team lead about what you're seeing and support it with data, the documentation you've already taken. Then you need to go forward with your documentation projects or other technical projects. Too often, workplace bullies are permitted to act with impunity because people would rather accept their bad behavior and avoid conflict than acknowledge how damaging it is. But if you are able to confront it, you need to do it safely. So even though everything isn't normal, you should still act in public as though it was. So what I mean by that is treat the commitments they make as though they were real and be surprised in public if they don't fulfill them. Follow up in writing and in public on commitments they have made and expect accountability. Escalate the problem to someone with more power than you if you need to, and since you've been documenting everything, you can do it convincingly. Privately expect delays and power plays, but don't tolerate them or engage with them. And finally, especially if you are a manager or supervisor and you're being told that there's a problem person on your team, please investigate and deal with it. It is incredibly toxic for you to ignore someone's bad behavior. And it's also incredibly common for you to have a different experience of that person as the person with more power than them than the people who have less power than them. So don't ignore it just because the broccoli you know seems different than the one that is being reported to you. Take care of it. I don't want to be completely negative here. So I'll also say this. Not all broccolis are what they appear to be. Some broccolis are broccolis right down to their roots, if you will, but I suspect that at least a few of the apparent broccolis you encounter are redeemable. Let me be clear, I'm not advocating that you ever put up with outright abuse or harassment, but sometimes a person who appears to be a broccoli might actually be a twisted version of their former turnip, kale, or sprout self. They act the way they act because of frustration and cynicism, because of a lack of ability to navigate the system usefully, or because they think it's the only way to get things done. But unlike a true broccoli, they actually care about more than their own power and importance. If you can empower them to use their killer instincts on behalf of the project instead of against their colleagues, you might just do everyone a huge favor. If you're up for the attempt, and you don't need to be, but if you are, then here's some words of advice. First, many of us have discomfort with conflict and with anger, and this can make it hard to be around people who seem angry. So if you can, try to temporarily interpret apparent hostility as a sign of how much they actually care about the thing. This can transform your impression of them and make it easier to listen. Then, even if you think you've heard it all before, even if you think you understand their grievance or objection thoroughly, try to really listen to them. Use active listening skills like reflecting back what you're hearing, checking your understanding with them, and so on. There's a big difference between hearing someone say, I've heard you, and them experiencing having been heard. Few of us are truly reassured when someone tells us, I've heard what you have to say. It's a lot more convincing to hear them demonstrate a real understanding of it. Be willing to acknowledge real barriers and problems. If someone is in distress about a problem, it doesn't reassure them to be told that it's fine. So don't sugarcoat it. If it's bad, it's bad. And the most reassuring thing is to know that someone else knows it's bad too. Then work together to identify a path forward and enact it. If they truly are a broccoli, to their very roots, you'll find this out in the process. But if they just went a bit broccoli accidentally, then this is where transformation can happen. So that's my talk. Here's the TLDR, right? Documentation is great and will solve all of our problems, citation needed. Applying academic theory to your work can offer interesting insights and also be fun. And crucifers are tasty, but more importantly, support and advocate for sprouts. They're great and naturally are on side with documentation. Reframe documentation for turnips, then support their writing of it, making it as painless as you can. It's worth doing. Gamify documentation for kales and, no pressure, successfully advocate for documentation as critical success criteria. And finally, protect yourself and others from broccoli and don't normalize their bad behavior. And thank you so much. So I look forward to answering your questions. And you can contact me anytime. And before you ask, as you can see, if you want those slides, they are available to you. There's a link on the screen, bit.ly/playergeekcamp2021.
You can see for your presentation. I think that was pretty insightful. Does anyone have any questions? If you have questions, you can line up at the blue steps ahead. Oh, Roland has a question, right? I think, Roland, you can go ahead and ask your question. Go ahead. Oh, Roland, can you stand on the red square? Yes, okay, great. Yeah.
There. Sorry, for some reason, anyway, doesn't matter. More an observation that perhaps strengthens the model than a question, but I spent some years mentoring very early stage startups, and a recurring pattern for successful early stage startups was 3 personas, known typically as the hacker, the hipster, and the hustler. They map pretty closely to your turnip, sprout, and kale, respectively. And I'd suggest that the absence of a fourth person in this common, strong structure is not an omission.
No, it is not an omission. It is the desired state, definitely, yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Roland. Does anyone else have any other questions or comments? I'm going to check the pigeonhole. Oh, we have a question from Harish. So Harish says, thanks for your talk, Kenzie. How would you manage those superstar devs who will not do anything?
How can they be superstars if they won't do anything? I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure I understand the question.
Yeah, maybe Harish, if you're around, you can go to the mic and ask your question. Yeah. Yes, Harish. You have to unmute yourself, Harish. Yes.
Yes, finally. I guess the question here has got to do with those who either they have been anointed as superstars or developers and so on, and they carry a certain expectation that they can just do what they need to do and they don't care about the rest of the world. So this could be a corner case, but I reckon it could be something that we need to figure out how to manage these kinds of individuals as well in the framework that you have put in. Perhaps they don't fit.
Right. Well, they might. I mean, they might be the kales of the world, or they might be the broccolis, like depending on the, exactly how it plays out. If, when I'm talking about, that everything's a big bang lunch and they want to do things their own way and you have to advocate to get them to sort of cooperate, that might sort of relate to what you're saying. And again, I think it's got to know who has power over who, in a way, who has influence on them. If you don't have influence on them, somebody must. Is it the manager? Is it, the CEO? Is it the somebody, like who has influence over somebody? And then there's a concept called influence mapping, where we actually look not at the power structure of the organization exactly, but on the influence structure of the organization. And so sometimes if you're not the person who has influence on this person, you need to talk to the people who does. Do they have a colleague that they really like to go for lunch with every day and who they'll listen to? Then maybe that's the person you befriend to try.
I guess the side question to that is there would be people who they claim to be recognized for the skill sets or the ability to go in and solve a problem, and then they disappear after that. They're not going to document anything. This is all in their head. They're not going to tell you what they did because it's all in their head, and they feel that they need to do it that way so that they get invited back in to solve problems. And it is a corner case, but I think it's something that a lot of us sometimes have to struggle with.
Totally.
All right, thank you, Harish, for that question. Thank you for your answer. If we have no other questions, does anyone else have a question or comment? If not, thank you, Kenzie, a lot for your presentation. I think a lot of us learned quite a bit from it. We really enjoyed it, especially with the analogies. Yes. And hope to see you around. I think you'll be hanging around. So if anyone's interested in talking to they you can go find them around the space. And with that, we'll have a break from until 10:50, and see you back 10:50 for the next talk, which is quite interesting too. It's a deep dive into the Git folder by Robert Richardson, and he's going to explain the Git folder and the objects within them. So stay tuned for that if you are interested in that, and see you around. Thank you, Kenzie, once again for your great presentation.
Right. Hi everyone. We will just wanted to call out that we will be starting our talk really shortly in just about a minute's time. I hope everyone is having some fun. I see many people dancing around with the music. So thank you to our DJ, Whole Life, for setting it up for us. All right, awesome. And I hope that everyone is at the back of the room dancing, having a great time. To take your seats. We will begin probably in about 15 seconds. All right. All right. Okay, cool. All right, it's kind of 10:50 a.m. here in Singapore, and we're just about to begin our next talk for the day. Right, so we are really excited today. We're going to have Rob Richardson. So Rob is joining us today to share with us a very interesting topic titled the definitive deep dive into the Git folder. Right, I'm sure many of us here use Git some point in our lives as a dev, and really love to find out more about what's hidden, hidden beneath the scenes here, right? And Rob is also a software craftsman building web properties in ASP.NET with his experience in Node, React, and Vue. I also understand he's a Microsoft MVP, right? And also a published author, frequent speaker at conferences, user groups, and community events, and is also a diligent teacher and student of high-quality software development. So it's really exciting, right? And I think it's a privilege for us to hear from Rob. So without further ado, Rob, I'd like to invite you on stage.
Nice. So this is, I'm live. Great. I tell you, I am definitely going to post the slides on my site tonight. And I will open every file inside the .git folder. But here's the part where I tell you I will definitely post my slides tonight. There are no slides. It is only live demos. That is so much of web pages. And in case you want to view those web pages later, that includes all of those details. So to get rich.org, click on presentations here, dive into the .git folder. You can get at the list of resources. Well, you're here on robrich.org. Thanks for the introduction. Let's click on a button recently. Yep, I'm a Microsoft MVP, Redgate. I'm a Cyril developer advocate. So if you're struggling, you can't hear me? The video things.
Hi everyone, just hold on a while we diagnose some technical issues with Rob's.
Can you hear me now? Oh, cool. Should I try turning my camera back on, or are we just like this? It's not like we're trying to move bits across the world. Oh wait, that's exactly what we're doing. Okay, so thanks for the introduction. Here's the part where I tell you I am definitely going to post the slides on my site tonight. But in this talk, there are no slides. We're going to dive into the .git folder, and we will examine every file in there. Thanks for the introduction. Here's a little bit more about me. You can head to robrich.org to learn about it. AZ GiveCamp is one of the things that's particularly cool. AZ GiveCamp brings volunteer developers together with charities to build free software. We start building software Friday after work. Sunday afternoon, we deliver the completed software to the charities. Sleep is optional, caffeine provided. If you're in Phoenix, come join us for the next AZ Give Camp. Or if you'd like a Give Camp here in Singapore or wherever you're watching from, hit me up on email or Twitter, and let's get a Give Camp in your neighborhood too. Some of the other things that I've done, I do a lot of Docker and Kubernetes training and consulting. So if you have that need, hit me up. And one of the things I'm particularly proud of, I replied to a .NET Rocks podcast episode. They read my comment on the air and they sent me a mug. Woohoo! So there's my claim to fame. So let's dig in. Now, right now, we just have an empty folder. So let's create a new Git repository. Now, we could definitely say git clone https github.com hub.com/foo. But in this case, let's say git init. Now we've got a Git repository. And if we do a directory, we don't see anything. But if we do an ls-la, we ls-l, nope. If we do a deep directory, then we will see this .git folder. Now I happen to have shown hidden files here. I went into view options and showed hidden files. But on Mac and Windows, it is hidden by default because it is a dot directory. So you'll have to do ls-la. But apparently that doesn't work inside PowerShell. Now that we've got a Git directory, let's add some content into it. Actually, before I do that, let me open up this Git directory in PowerShell or in VS Code. Now I'm specifically opening up the .git directory and not the containing directory because VS Code will hide the .git directory for us, which is pretty cool. So we have head, description, config, refs. We've got that one pretty empty. Objects, we also have some empty directories in there. Info, hooks. Now we're going to dive into each of these files in time. First, let's take a look at objects. Now, yeah, definitely. This one is definitely bigger, but VS Code's left menu is a little weird. Okay, file 1 contents. I'm going to redirect that to file 1, and then I'm going to git add file 1 and git commit -m file 1. Oh, let me give it a message. File 1 commit message. There we go. So we've got our first commit. And now here inside the .git folder, we have Control+. We have 3 folders here. The AD folder, the B8 folder, the F3 folder. We've got 3 files, one inside of each one. If we were to say git log, we see this commit B843F4. Okay, so here inside the .git folder, here's B843F4. And if we open that one up in text editor, yep, it's binary. It's a whole bunch of garbage here. So let's take a look at it. It is actually zlib compressed. So we can take a look here at ways that we can unzlib compress this. Now we could use Perl, we could use OpenSSL, an interesting use of OpenSSL, by the way. We could use Python. In this case, I chose to make this Node program. Here is the Node program. I just called it unzipper. And unzipper, oh wow, that's big. Unzipper will go read the files and unzlib compress it using this inflate function from the zlib directory, library rather, and then split it based on nulls and output it. So let's take a look at that. We've got B843, so let's say unzipper.git/objects/B8/ and here's the contents, pardon me, here's the contents of that file. It says commit 194. We've got some content that looks a whole lot like the commit message. Yep, here's that file 1 commit message. We've got the author and committer, email address, date and time here. Yep, so this commit is that commit message, and it references this, AD88CA. Well, that looks familiar. Here is AD88 CA. Now that's also a zlib compressed thing. So let's unzipper that one. Git /object/ad. And that one, it's double zlib compressed. That's interesting. But it says tree and 37. Let's take a look at the third one as well. So AD88, we've also got F3CF. Okay, so let's unzipper F3 and CF. And so here's the contents there of that file. Now it says blob, and here's the file one contents. Ooh, that's the contents of the file that we created. So we see three different types of nodes. We have commit nodes, we have tree nodes, and we have blob nodes. Now we could definitely unzipper them, but this one being extra compressed, that's a little weird. Instead, let's use git commands for this. So git log. We'll first look at B843. We can use git cat file -t, and it will tell us the type of that node. Now we saw before it said commit 190 something. It's a type commit node. Now if we cat the contents, we can use the same command, but we'll say -p instead. And here's that content. When we unzippered the file, it said commit, and then it said a number, and that was the length of this file. That's cool. So we've got that. Let's also get cat file, and we'll do the type of this tree node. It's going to tell us, yep, it's a tree node. Let's do that, but let's actually grab the contents. And now we see, oh, hey, here's some file permissions. Here's a blob node, and we'll reference this one. Oh, that's the third node. Nice. Git cat file -t. It is of type blob. Git cat file -p, and we can see the contents of that blob. So let's commit some more stuff. We currently only have one file. Let's say echo file2, and we'll redirect that to file2.txt. Do we have any more files here inside of our objects folder? Nope, not yet. Okay, let's git add file2. Do we have more objects yet? Yes, we have the 6C folder. That's cool. Now let's commit it. Git commit -m file2. And now we've got a new commit, 545D. So back in here, here's 545D. And we also have this tree node in the middle. Now, let's take a look at that 545D. Git cat file -p 545D. Notice that I don't need the whole commit, only just the beginning. And that references this parent node and also this tree node. Keeping track of this is kind of getting a little bit confusing. I'd love to have a tool that will help me visualize this. Well, I've built a tool here at Git Explorer. That's in the list of tools on this gist. And this allows us to be able to visualize the content. We'll start off by putting the path to our repository, not the .git folder, but rather the folder that contains the .git folder. So let's start up that website here. And, oh, looks like it's already started. Let me start it again, just in case. Pardon me. And now when we've got that folder, that content running, let's take a look at this, and we'll be able to see the content inside of our repository. Oh, it's still building. Okay, there we go. Now we'll see those 6 nodes, and I can click on each one, and it'll show me, oh, there's the blob one. Here's the tree node. Here's, well, wouldn't it be cool if we could show the types? Okay, so now I can see the types, and I just randomly picked colors for them. And now let's show their tags. Well, that's a little bit weird. Let's put them in alphabetical order, and now we can show their tags. Okay, so F3CF, B843. Now we can much more easily cruise through them. But as we were looking at this node, we saw that it had a parent of this one. So we could then go reference that. Wouldn't it be cool if we could, I don't know, put them in order? So let's flip to the parent-child view. We'll show the lines and show the tags. And so here's that commit that we just made. And its parent commit is right here. This commit references this tree node. And this tree node says I have 2 files in the working directory. And so here's the first file, F3, and that's right here. The second file, C6, and that's right here. So in this original commit, we only had 1 file in our checkout directory. In this new commit, we have 2 files in our directory. That's cool. Let's create some more commits. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say echo file3 and redirect that to file3.txt. Do we have any nodes, any new nodes in our thing? Nope, we've still got just those 6. Okay, so now let's git add file3 to our staging area. And we'll come in here and refresh. And we saw it create that new commit. Let's show type, parent child, show the lines, show the tags. And we have this new blob node. As we add content to the staging area, it creates this new blob node. And that's really helpful to be able to keep track of the portions of that file that we've chosen to commit. Okay, now let's commit it. Git commit -m file3. And now we've got a new commit. Let's refresh this, show the type, parent child, show the lines, show the tags. Okay, here's our new commit. It references this tree node that says there's now 3 files in this directory, but we still only have those 3 blobs. That's cool. Here's file 3. Now, that was cool. It created the blob as we added it to the staging area. It created the tree node and the commit node as we committed it. Well, what if we create something in a folder? Let's come here into this Git folder and we'll create a new folder. We'll call that folder. And now I'm going to say echo file2 and redirect that into folder/file2. Okay, let's git add folder/file2, git commit -m file2 in a folder, and let's take a look at what those nodes look like. Refresh, show type, parent child, show the lines, show the tags. Ooh, here is our commit, and it references this tree node, and this tree node says I've got 3 files in the current directory and 1 file that is in this folder. Now notice this is 6C49, it's this file 2 right here. We still only have 3 blobs, even though we have 4 files in our working directory, because this file is exactly the same. We don't need to re-add the blob, and because these are zlib compressed, and because Git is so good at reusing content, then it's really cool. We didn't need to take up extra space just because we wanted to keep track of more content. Now that's awesome. Here in our objects folder, we have those objects for commit nodes, we have tree nodes, and we have blob nodes. Now, if we were to run git gc, it would pack them into this pack folder, but I'm not going to do that right now, just so that we can start to explore them in interesting ways. Okay, so that's objects. That's how it stores things inside of our repository. Now, one of the things that we notice here is we have git log --1line --graph --decorate. We have labels. So here's head and here's main. Let's take a look at that. Now here in this folder, we had a head. Oh, that's interesting. Let's open up head, and it says ref to refs heads main. Okay. Now where is refs heads main? Well, we do have a refs folder here. Let's pop it open. Oh, there's a heads folder inside, and here's main. FB3E06. Oh, that looks familiar. That's the commit that it's on. So if I wanted to move my main to, I don't know, right here, then I could actually, let me say git log. I do need the full commit for this. If I wanted to move it to this commit, I could put this commit here in this file, and now git log --1line --graph --decorate. Decorate is the one that puts the labels on. Now head is pointing to main, and main is back down here. Now, the only way that we can break Git is by changing content in the .git folder. So let me put it back there. But we can see that refs heads main is the location, the commit that this points to. And head is the spot where head points to. So if we were to say git checkout, let's create a branch. Git branch, branch 2, and we'll put it here on this file 2. Oops. Branch 2, there we go. Now we have 2 branches. Head is pointing at main and branch 2. So back in our .git folder, we see we have this new branch 2 file that points at a different commit. Now head is still pointing at refs heads main, but if we say git checkout branch 2, now head is pointing at refs heads branch 2. That's cool. Now, if we, for example, say check out this, so let's say git checkout this commit. Now we're not checking out a branch, we're checking out a commit. You're in a detached head state. Did I just take off my head? I imagine Halloween zombie things happening. Now what it's telling us here is that head no longer points at one of these branches, it just points directly at a commit. Now we can still use git, we can still say echo file 5, redirect that to file 5.txt, git add file 5, git commit -m file 5, and that still worked. Let's do git log --one line --graph decorate, but we're also going to do --all to be able to see all the branches. We can see that this one went this way and this one went that way. Now that's okay, but because we don't have a branch label here, eventually as Git goes and collects unnecessary nodes, it might reclaim this one. What the zombie message here is telling us is that we need to check out a branch. Okay, so let's say git checkout -b branch 2. Oh, not branch 2, branch 3. There. Now Git is a lot happier because head now points at a particular branch. Head no longer points at a commit. Great. So we got to see how refs heads work. Here are the branches that we have. Well, how do tags work? So let's do our git log --one line --graph decorate --all, and let's put a tag here on main. Git tag v0.1 main. Now we've got a tag that matches main. So let's open up that tag. Inside refs, we also have this tags folder. Here's v0.1, and here's that commit, which, yes, thanks VS Code. I'm glad you have things that'll help me with .1. FB3E06, which, by the way, is that commit message, FB3E06. So the tag doesn't point at a branch, the tag points at a commit. The branch doesn't point at a tag, the branch points at a commit. So that's pretty cool. Now, we saw how we could use heads and tags. How about remotes? Well, I happen to have this other folder here, this server folder, and it is also empty. Let's switch over into that server folder, and we will say git init. We're going to build a server. Now, in this case, for servers, we probably don't need that checkout directory. So we're going to say --bear. Now, by saying bear, we don't create the .git folder and its contents. Instead, we just create the contents. So I don't have a .git folder. I only have the contents of the .git folder, which means I have no checkout directory. That's perfect for a server. So I've got this server here. Now, I want to be able to reference the server from my branch, and so I could say git remote add origin. Why is it called origin? Doesn't need to be. I could call it server or AWS or Azure, but by default, we call it origin. And then I'll give it the URL to that. We could say https github.com/ blah, 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 or we could point it to a file server. server slash path to repo, or we could say a file on our directory on our local machine. So C git path to repo. But in this case, I'm going to say it's up one directory and inside server. Cool. Git remote -v will list the remotes, and so there's our remote. Okay. So now let's say git push origin main. Now it always bothered me, why do we specify the server first in main? Wouldn't I want to say git push the main branch to the origin server? Well, yeah, but I could push to the origin server the main branch and branch 1, branch 2, and branch 3, and those would all go together. And so I need to specify the server first because everything else is a branch. Okay, so let's push main and branch 2. Now the cool part is if we pop over to the server and we look inside the objects directory, it now has all of those objects in the same way that our local machine had those objects. Perfect. Now let's pop back into VS and take a look at the refs. Now we have here a new folder called remotes. Now inside the remotes folder is an origin folder, and inside the origin folder we have main and branch 2. Here's where we left the server last, at 545D78 for branch 2 and FB3E06 for main. Perfect. Now if we were to say git push origin branch 3, now we would send these additional things to the server. It now has more objects in its objects folder. And back here on our local repository, we now have a reference to branch 3 as well. So that's cool. Here in the refs folder, we have all of the heads, all of the branches, all of the remotes, all of the tags, all of the human readable pieces here in the refs folder. Now they all relate to various commits that we have in the objects folder, and head is one of the refs. Why is it not in the refs folder? Because Linus said so. Okay, so I've got this content here, and git log -- one line -- graph -- decorate -- all. I'm going to say git remote remove origin. Now I don't have any of those red branches. That's cool. Now I'm going to say git checkout main, and I'm going to say git branch -d branch 3. I am totally done with that. Oh wait, no, I'm not. Now how do I get back to that content? It's gone. Well, is it gone? Let's come refresh our graph and take a look. Show the type, parent child, show the lines, show the tags. Here's where main is. Here's where that branch was, but there's no branch pointing to it. It's still there. Now it's E886EB, but let's see if we can find that. Our next tool that we're going to look at is git reflog. Sometimes I see this said as reflog, and I can see this cat of 9 tails. And it's like, yeah, that's not it. Reflog. We're looking for, where did the refs move? Now we didn't specify anything, so it's going to look at head, and it says head was here and it moved to here. It was here and it moved to here. We can take a look here inside the .git folder in the logs folder, and we will see that log of where all the content was. So we were here and then we moved to here. We were here and then we moved to here. So reflog is a great way to be able to parse this content. And we have reflogs for every head and every remote that we need to look at. So we did a reflog and we say, we used to be right here. That's cool. Git checkout that. Git checkout -b branch 3. And now if we do a git log -- one line -- graph -- decorate -- all, we're back. Reflog is a great way to be able to find the content that you've built recently. Now let's do one more thing. I want to say echo file 6 and redirect that to file 6.txt. But here in file 6, I am going to accidentally commit some content that I don't expect. Here's some accidental secrets. Git add file 6, git commit -m file 6. And now I'm cruising through the repository looking at my content. Let's show the type, parent, child, show the lines, show the tags. Uh-oh, I committed some secrets. Here's my accidental secrets. Let's see if we can remove them. Now I'm going to come into the file and I'm going to pop this open and I'm going to delete that line. And now as I commit my content, git add file 6, I know that there's a commit flag that I can use. I'm going to say --amend. Now amend is kind of like automatically squashing this into place. So I'm going to change this commit. Git log --one line --graph --decorate --all, and yay, it's gone. It's out of my local directory. It's out of my commit history, but is it? Let's refresh this and take a look. Show the type, parent, child, show the lines, show the tags. Here is our new commit, and it references this tree node that references this blob, and we see file 6 without the secrets. But we still have this commit right here that references this blob that does have the secrets. If ever you commit secrets into Git, Git is really good at keeping track of them. So the moment that you commit secrets into Git, even if you squash them out, even if you force push, consider those secrets lost. They are already in Git's history. Now, we did a bunch of stuff. Eventually, it'll fall out. If we run a git gc, then if it's been older than 2 weeks and if it's no longer referenced, it might fall out. But how many people cloned this repository and got that commit before we did this? The moment that you commit secrets, consider them lost. Now we took a look at the refs folder. We took a look at the objects folder. We took a look at the logs folder. Let's take a look at hooks. Now each of these hooks is a shell script. Now it ends in .sample, so these aren't running yet. Here's a Perl script, which is pretty cool. But if we were to rename these and remove the .sample, then they would execute. So let me reach into this folder. I've got a copy of these hooks files with the .sample removed, where in each one, I am just echoing the hook name and the arguments that got passed to it. So here's my commit message hook, and here's my FS monitor hook, and here's my post update hook. So now let's do some operations and see how hooks work. Hooks are great for being able to do automation, like let me go run unit tests on the files that changed, or let me go lint the files that I'm about to commit. So echo file 7, let's redirect that to file 7.txt. Nope, no hooks have run yet. Git add file 7. No hooks there either. Git commit -m file 7. And now we see a pre-commit hook, a prepare message hook, commit message hook, and we can see the arguments passed into it. So, for example, that's the name of the file that contains this message. If I wanted to manipulate that, I could change this file, and then when it came to committing it, then it would use my updated message. Now we already deleted the remote, so let's add that back in. Git remote add origin /server git push origin main. And let's take a look at the commits that happen here. Ooh, we've got a pre-push hook. Very nice. Git pull origin main. We've got some more hooks here. Now we can also put hooks on the server that do really interesting things. If ever you've, for example, done a git push into Netlify or into Azure Web Apps, and then you see a whole lot of messages in your Git history that don't seem to come from you, yeah, that's a hook that they have on the server. So I've crafted these hooks and I've done some really cool things to be able to get these hooks to do awesome stuff. And now I want to commit them. So let me say git add dot git slash hooks slash apply patch message git status. Nope, we can't commit the hooks because they're inside the .git folder. So there are various programs that we can use. Here's one for Node called Git Hooks that will automatically symlink these hooks into place in another repository. Oh, and it looks like I'm not getting history from Git. That's interesting. But we can use other packages, so referencing this history. In Node, there's Git Hooks and Husky. In Python, there's pre-commit, which is also used by other communities, including the C# community. PHP has PHP Git Hooks or Grum PHP. Shell is Git Hooks, or Baziz has a gist for this. Go actually rewrote Git Hooks into Go, which is pretty cool. Or you can create a Git setting pointing your Git Hooks to another directory. Now, the hard part is this config is also not committed. So the cool part about a package like this is that it automatically symlinks the .hooks or the hooks folder into a folder that you can commit. In the case of hooks, it's actually the .git hooks folder, which is pretty cool. So at that point, then we can create these hooks and we can share them among our team. That's excellent. So we took a look at the hooks folder. That's really fun. Let's take a look at some config files. Here is an exclude file. We could exclude the node modules folder. If we're in .NET, we could exclude bin obj. If we're in Python, we could exclude the .venv folder. This is a .gitignore file. Now, it is a .gitignore file, but it is inside the .git folder. So I would invite you to not use this and instead use an actual .gitignore. Let's say echo bin to .gitignore, and we'll open that one up inside of VS Code, and we'll put all of our ignore files in here. Now, the beauty of putting them here in this .gitignore file is now we can change them. So let's git add .gitignore, and now we're sharing them with the rest of our team. Perfect. While we're looking at commit files, let's also look at some more config files. Here's the config file. Now, this config file includes all of the things that I set up when I set up this repository, and this overrides the details associated with my user directory. So let's open up c-users rob.git config, and here's the settings that I set. Remember when you said create git config -g user.name? Yep, there's user.name and user.email. You did the -g so that you set it globally in this user-specific config file. Now, I'm not thrilled with that name, global, because it is user-specific, but it is global to all of my repositories, I guess. And this one overrides all of the settings here inside of the git config file that is installed, in my case, inside program files git etc. Now, this one is all of the selections that I made as I ran through the Git wizard. Now, that's perfect. I have these settings, it's overridden by these settings, and overridden by these settings. So if I wanted to have this repository only include my work email, but have all the rest of my repositories include my personal email, I can go grab these settings, I can set them in place right here, and instead of this, I will say company.com. There. Now, when I do some commits, let's echo file 8 into file 8.txt, git add file 8, git commit -m file 8, and .git config. Hello. Git log, and now we can see that this one uses my corporate email address, where the other ones used my local email address. Nice. So we've got a few more temp files. We have packed refs, fetch head, orig head. Those are commit messages that are hooks used to be able to communicate. And so we'll just ignore those temp files. But here's one more configuration file. This is the That sounds great. Here's the description file, and this includes the description that you would use in Git InstaWeb. If you've never used Git InstaWeb, me neither. The last file that we're going to look at is this index file. And yes, it is a binary file, and it's kind of messy. If you want to dig into what it means, here's a Stack Overflow post that goes into the specific syntax of it. But the cool part is we can use git ls files to be able to look through it. Git ls files will be able to enumerate all of the files in our checkout directory. Now this is really helpful because Git doesn't have to traverse through all of these nodes to be able to get at what when it changed last. It can just go find the hash of the file in that directory, and it can compare that to the hash of the file right now, and now it knows if that file has changed. So git diff is really fast. Now we got to look through all of the files here inside this Git folder. Now we didn't run through all the commands, but we did run through all the files, which is really excellent. You can grab the list of, here's one website that kind of reviews each of those files and describes what they do. This can be a great review if you want to look through the contents of this talk. All of this is referenced here in this gist, and you can grab this gist from robrich.org, click on presentations, and you can pop open this gist right now. If you're watching this talk later, hit me up on Twitter at @rob_rich. For those of you here live at the event, what are your thoughts? What are your questions?
Thank you, Rob, for your presentation. I think that was very insightful, and I learned a lot from it. Does the audience have any questions? I think if you have any questions, please approach the mic, or you can post them on Pigeonhole. I don't see any questions in Pigeonhole at the moment, but if you have any questions for Rob, you can please approach the mic.
Then I'll turn off screen share and switch to my camera.
Yeah,
so
thanks.
You can see me.
That's great. Any questions? So, I do have a question for you. Like, what's a good case where I should use the .git/info/exclude for the file? Yeah. Oh, sorry, I can't hear you. I think you're muted. Rob, I don't think I can hear you.
Are you able to hear me better?
Oh, yes, I can hear you now. Okay, great.
That was annoying. Good questions. Times when it would be good to use that exclude file. If I have local changes on my machine that I definitely don't want to commit, but it doesn't make sense to include them in the repository. Maybe I have a notes file, or maybe I have a config file that I've definitely made changes to, but I don't want to share it. Then that might be a good candidate for using that exclude file. But the majority of the time, putting those additional entries inside of the .gitignore file is better. There was a team that I was working on once where we filled that Git, the exclude file, and then that was the machine where everything went weird. And we could never figure out why those files didn't update. And it's like, oh, yeah, we chose to ignore them. Sorry.
I see. Thank you. Thank you. If you all have any other questions, you can ask Rob. You all can probably find him. Will you be hanging around for a little while?
I will be.
Okay,
is there a designated spot for Q&A?
Sorry?
Is there a designated spot for Q&A? Should I?
No, but if you are interested in asking Rob questions, I think Rob, you can just find Rob by following him around. Okay,
that sounds great.
Thank you, Rob, for your talk. I hope everyone learned something from it. I think
This was so much fun.
we have the next speaker lined up. We are a bit behind time, but it's okay. The next up, we have Karan Balka with demystifying the Java Flight Recorder API. So I think he's going to talk about how developers who wish to monitor the performance of applications, especially in the case of data-heavy loads. So he wants to help developers understand how to integrate Java Flight Recorder APIs into their existing Java-based projects and in a seamless manner. So he's a mobile application developer primarily working on Android for the past 5 years. He has also worked on augmented AR and VR-based mobile applications and is very passionate about exploring new technologies. So I'll just hand over time straight away to Khan to proceed with this talk.
Yeah, thank you, Ambrose, for that wonderful introduction. I hope I'm audible. Okay, great. So let me start sharing my screen. Okay, so today's topic. Before I start today's presentation, again, I would like to thank the entire team of GeekCamp Singapore for putting this up and for inviting me to present my talk. So thank you so much. So here's a brief background about me. I think Ambrose already mentioned, but I've been working primarily as an Android mobile developer, but more recently I've been also dabbling on AI technologies like AI, AR, and VR. And I would say, apart from being passionate about technology, I also love writing poems, traveling to different places across the globe, and meeting new people. So that's about me in a nutshell. So coming to the topic of today. So before that, here's a brief background. So the Java Flight Recorder basically was an event recorder which was built into the JVM, and the main objective of this, or the main task of this recorder, was to do certain activities like profiling, I would say garbage collection, black box analysis. So these were mainly the task this kind of a flight recorder was designed to perform. It was open sourced in the year 2018, so that was the year where it was open sourced. And there is it is said that it has almost no performance overhead. So there is a short disclaimer here. So when I say no performance overhead, it means that if you are using the standard, the default, the settings of the Java flight recorder, the performance overhead observed is slightly less than, say, a 2%. But if if you're using it for applications which are slow running, or applications which are not really ideal for a production environment, then of course the performance overhead would be slightly more than 2%. So that is a short disclaimer on the performance part. And the main task, I would say, is the analysis and the visualization of the flight recording. So that is basically done using something called as the Java Mission Control. So what is exactly the Java Mission Control? Now, the Java Mission Control, I think most of us have seen it or might have even used it. So it's basically a graphical user interface that provides a set of tools for monitoring and profiling of Java applications. So what does this do is that it takes as an input a flight recording file. So it's basically a file with a .gfr extension. And this file, basically, once you open it into the Java Mission Control, it shows you a lot of statistical information, like it shows you the heap usage, the CPU usage, and so on. So this is basically shown in a very graphical user interface manner, so people can visualize it better and understand the bottlenecks in the application. Also, I would like to mention, like, this also has been open sourced, and there is an open source version of this available. So I have mentioned the link at the bottom. Now, coming to the main topic, which basically everyone is using nowadays, is about the Java flight recorder. Now, how does actually one start using or start running the Java flight recorder? So for this, basically there are two approaches that exist as of today. So the first approach is using a command line. So one can actually use a tool called the JCMD tool, which is basically a part of the Java installation directory. And using this command, one can start the flight recording. So this command basically would be something like, you specify the process ID. So in this case, if you go with the first example, so it mentions JCMD followed by the process ID. followed by the method or the task. In this case, I would like to start the recording. You specify a duration, so that will be the duration of the recording, followed by the file name of the recording. So in this case, I have just given an example like a myrecording.jfr. So what this would do is that this would start the flight recording, and this would basically go on for a duration of 60 seconds, and then write the contents to a particular recording file. Now, this is the most common approach of starting the recording using the JCMD tool. However, the second approach is what we are going to discuss more in detail, which is using the Java Flight Recorder API. Now, in order to basically use a Java Flight Recorder API, you need to write a Java program or an agent. So in this case, how would you actually start the recording? So for that, you would use a command like this, where I have specified certain parameters, which is basically going to specify whether to start the flight recording. So in this case, you could basically go with java-xx start flight recording, followed by the file name and the name of your file. So this file is basically going to be a Java program that would basically have it will make use of the Java Flight Recorder API. Also, here I would like to mention that the Java Flight Recorder is a commercial feature, and it is basically requiring a license if it's to be used in a production environment. However, if you're planning to use it maybe in a development environment, you could easily go ahead and unlock the commercial features by using the next command, which is basically going to unlock the commercial features and do the same task of starting the flight recording for that specific duration. So this is how one can basically get started or start running the Java flight recorder. Now coming to the next slide. So how does actually one create his first or start recording his first event? So for that, one can actually use the Java Flight Recorder API, and one can go about creating a simple class. So you create a simple class which basically extends the event class. So the event is the base class on in the jdk.jfr package, which would basically denote your event. So here you could have multiple kind of events. You could actually go about creating your own events as well. So in this case, I have basically created a simple event with a particular annotation. So I'll be talking more about annotations in the subsequent slides. And here you can see that there are primarily two methods. So once you create an object of your event class, you can use two methods, basically event.begin and event.commit, which is basically going to start and stop the recording. So the event.begin would basically start the recording, and the event.commit would basically end the recording, as well as it would basically write the recording to a file. So it does basically two tasks. So that is the purpose of the event.commit. So here you can also see that I have specified an optional message over here, which is basically a parameter in this case. So you could actually here is where you can actually specify the log message in your case, and this would help you to understand how the flight recorder API can be used to capture certain events. Now this is a very simple example, but let's try to understand it through code. So what I've done is that I have created a short recording of a demo that I had come up with. So let me just try to play that. So here is the same class. Here is the flight recorder class over here, and here I have basically gone about with creating a particular class called hello, which is extending the base class. And here is where I start recording and the event. So if I had to run this application, so let's say I run this application using the start flight recording parameter. So this is how it would behave. So once you start running it, it would show you a message saying that it has started recording. So it shows you that it has started recording, and there is using a max size of say 250 MB. So this is basically the default. So now basically one can use the Java flight recorder. So once the recording basically has started, one can use something called as a GFR. So the GFR basically is also a tool that is used to view the contents of the recording. So here you can see that I have used the JFR command to print the contents of the recording file. So this is basically something that I would be talking about in the next slide. So I mentioned about the event metadata. So right, the event metadata basically comprises of the annotations, the descriptions, the labels. So this is basically to provide more kind of data about the events. The event, we can also have category annotation. So you can have an annotation called category, which is basically used to I would say divide or categorize your events. So if you have say more than 10 events, than one event in your project, and if you want to group them, so I would suggest using the category annotation, as well as you can, if you have more than one category, then you can use a comma separated list of strings as well, so that is also possible. And coming to the next slide where I spoke about the JFR tool. Now, once you start the recording, the output of that is going to be a Java flight recorder file. So it's going to be a flight recording. But then this flight recording is not something that is human readable, right? So does not contain by default, it does not contain those information that you could simply output into a more human readable format. So for that, we use something called as a JFR tool, and the JFR tool is exactly doing this. So it basically helps you to filter and summarize the flight recording files into a more human readable format. So to go back to the video which I was playing. So in this case, you can see that once you basically output you use the print command and output the contents of the recording file. Here you can see that it specifies the start time, the duration, the message that I basically logged, as well as a stack trace in case of if there are certain issues or anything, and the event thread in that case as well. So these kind of information can be basically then visualized or analyzed in a way to determine what could be the possible bottleneck in your program. So this is basically how the Java flight recorder JFR tool basically is working, and this tool is also part of the JDK as well. So this is something that you could use as well. Now, coming to the next part, so I spoke about how one can print the contents or view the contents of the recording file. So for that, one could simply use a simple command, which is the JFR print command, followed by the name of the class that you're using. So in this case, it's hello flight recorder, and the name followed by the name of the recording file. So this would basically output something like this, which specifies the start time, the duration, message, and these are the default, I would say, the information that would come, but then you could customize it as well. So now the question arises, like, why do we actually need to use the Java flight recorder, or why do we need to use this particular API? So as software developers, the most common scenario we face nowadays is basically when a production issue occurs, and whenever it occurs, I think the most one of the most common things we do is we start analyzing the logs. So we need to understand that is logging actually the most effective strategies for debugging in production, and if yes, then how does actually one try to manage the log files? Because if there are there can be several log files, so they would grow eventually in size. Then how does actually one manage it, whether they keep it at a centralized location or they archive it? So there are a lot of questions that needs to be answered, especially in case of a logging mechanism. And the idea basically is to understand whether it's really safe to debug in production. Now, for those of you who have used logging frameworks, I think one of the most common frameworks has been the Java util login. Now, the Java util login has been there for quite some time, and it has been there ever since JDK 1.4. However, there is a way by which one can feel that this framework is not behaving or not being used widely enough. And the fact is that many popular application servers like Apache Tomcat itself, they have their own default implementation of logging. So even they do not use the standard Java util login. They have their own default implementation, and this is mainly due to the fact that the Java util login does not have the ability to have per application login, and there is always a lack of a buffered handler implementation that has a significant impact on the performance if you're using the Java util login. And the main reason I would say is for the lack of adoption of the Java util login these days is that it does not provide more information about the context in which the event occurs. So this is again one of the main reasons I would say that the Java util login is not used as widely as the other logging frameworks. So, to highlight some of the differences between the JFR and JUL. So the JFR, yes, it does provide contextual information about the event. So I talked about the metadata aspect where you can have event metadata, you can define your own metadata. So that is basically going to provide you more contextual information. Whereas on the other hand, the Java util login basically will be only responsible for capturing events, which are basically log records and passing them to the appropriate appender. Yes, the GFR would require a commercial license, whereas the Java util login does not require any license at all. And the GFR, the recording files basically can be visualized, I would say, later on. So if you plan to visualize the GFR recording files, they can be done, whereas in case of a GUL, there is no such visualization support. On the other hand, both support customization of events. So you're again the GFR and the GUL, I would say, score equally. But the GFR, of course, would take some time to set up. So there will be some amount of time that you would like to invest in the beginning, but at the long run, it could save you a lot of time. Whereas the GUL is something that one could, quickly set up in less time without much hassle. So that is basically the key differences between the GFR and the GUL. So let's take a more practical example. So, we understood how the GFR is working. So let's take an example of how the GFR will be used in a practical use case. So let's say I have to identify certain slow running SQL queries in my project. So how do I go about using or identifying, that using the Java Flight Recorder API? So let's say you have a query like this, where you can see that there is an inner join, or there is a join being performed on two tables. So there is a product table and a sales order detail table, and both these tables, basically there is an inner join being done on, say, a particular column, and you can see there is an or condition on a particular column. Now assuming, even if these the columns in these tables were not indexed, the or condition itself would create a lot of it would consume a lot of processing power, and that would basically eventually result in a slow running query. But this particular, I would say, this particular query is not the ideal one. So if I had to basically create an ideal running query in this particular situation, I would basically replace this or with something called as a select, and then I would basically do a union. So the select operation basically would be replacing the or in this case, and the union basically would help to concatenate the results and then remove the duplicate. So this is how one can usually write this kind of a query. If someone is familiar with the backend technologies. But then if you're using the Java Flight Recorder API, then how does one go about identifying this? So fortunately, the Java Flight Recorder API can be used even in this scenario. So how does one actually go about using this is what I'll be demoing right now. So let's go back to our recording, where I have created the same program. So I have basically an example here called the SQL Analyzer class. So this SQL Analyzer class basically is doing mainly three activities. Basically, it tries to insert certain records. So it tries to insert a large number of records in the table. It fetches some records from a table, as well as it deletes the records from the table. So let's try to run this application. So this is again a custom class that I have created that uses the Java Flight Recorder API. Again, I would run this. So it's a simple menu driven program which would basically ask you to do certain tasks. So in this case, the first task would be to ensure that there are no records in the table. So I would basically go about deleting the records. So yes, so the records are deleted. Now let's try inserting the records. So this will basically insert around, say, 15K records in the table. So okay, so now it's basically inserting the record. So this would take quite some time, and then let's go ahead a little bit. So once it is done inserting the records, so once you have completed inserting the records, you could actually try fetching them. So here is where each of these methods, or each of these operations, I have basically used the event.begin and the event.commit methods of the Java Flight Recorder API to understand how much time it would take. So in this case, I have basically tried to enter a value which is basically not exist. So it has done the fetching of the records, but it has not found the item. Whereas in this case, the next case I try entering a number which is, say, something that is existing. So it has found that this particular value. Now let's try to understand how much time it took actually to do all these operations. So again, I would use the JFR tool to print the contents of the recording. So once this is done, you will be able to understand how much time it took. So here is the result. So here is the result of the entire the operation. So here you can see that the deleting of records from the database, it took around, say, 97.3 milliseconds. The inserting of records took around 49.2 seconds. So that was the insert operation. And when we tried to fetch a record which was not existing, it took around 49.2 milliseconds. So that was for a record which was not existing. Whereas for a record which was existing, it took around roughly around 8 milliseconds. So that is that is how one can analyze. So this is basically a simple example, but one can actually use this in projects which are using certain nested queries or certain complex queries to identify what could be the possible bottlenecks in that particular query. So this is also something that could be used especially in projects which are doing a lot of database related operations. So coming to the next slide. So this is this is something that I just demonstrated. So it talks about how one can use the Java Flight Recorder to query or to understand the different operations going on in the database. So I'll just skim through this. So apart from the the main task of recording of the flight events, or to basically log the events, I think GFR does have a lot more to offer. So there are something is that one could actually leverage, which is more in terms of periodic events, dynamic events, custom annotations, and finally the event streaming API. So I have basically tried to focus more on the last one, which is basic the event streaming API. I think something this is also something that one could easily leverage in current projects today. So the event streaming API basically is nothing but to help you to write custom events to monitor HTTP calls. So how do we go about that? Again, the process would be the same. You create a class which extends the event class, which is the base class, and you specify a unique event name. So in this case, I have gone with a simple name called as a com.app.flightrecorderdemo.http request event. So this name would be my unique name, and you define certain query, some metadata. So in this case, it would be the query parameters. So in this case, what I plan to do is that I want to fetch or get the query parameters from the URL and try to log it. So the question is, how do I basically create an endpoint? So for this, you would need to create a RESTful endpoint, of course. So you need to have maybe in this case, I would recommend leveraging like Spring Boot frameworks like Spring Boot, or you could go with any known framework out there. And you could create a simple endpoint. So in this case, I've created a simple endpoint called greeting, so which takes in a default parameter, say name, and what it does is that it just basically uses the Java Flight Recorder API to log this particular event using the query parameters metadata. So this is how one can actually create an endpoint and then use it. So let's try to understand how this would work. So going back to the video again. So here is where how I would use the particular the Java event the event streaming API. So here you can see I have created my endpoint. So there is an endpoint which is there, and you have this particular class that I have already created. So this class would basically have all the metadata information that you need to capture. So in this case, I have gone with a simple query parameters, and here is how you basically run it. So first of all, you need to basically start the server. So you need to specify this command by which you could start the server and also start the recording. So this command basically would take in the file name, the recording, and also start the server. So you can see that the server has now started, and the endpoint is something that you could call using a standard web browser. So you can go in the web browser and specify the name. In this case, I've just specified my name, and then you see that the endpoint has been invoked. Now what is happening in the background is that although the logging is done, one needs to identify whether whether how this would basically work. So for that, one needs to also write an agent or a program that would basically subscribe to this event. So this is where I would like to highlight one of the classes of the Java Flight Recorder API, which is the event stream class. So this event stream class basically would what would do is that it would basically subscribe to this event. So the subscribe, as in it would listen to the event and then basically try to extract these query parameters. So here is where you could write your own custom logic. So you can listen to these events, try to listen to these events and try to understand like how much time it would take to, if there is a particular event. So here it has started listening. So if you basically type in the name again and you try to invoke this endpoint again, this would basically try to print the statement or print the information of the recording. So here, yes, it has logged it, but then let's see the recording. So here you can see that since it's in a loop, you have a message that has been printed, which is basically the query parameters the person has passed through the URL. So here is one way by which you can actually leverage this, especially if you are having a microservice kind of an approach, where you are using several microservices to do certain tasks. So you can actually have the Java Flight Recorder API to monitor these tasks and to understand which of these microservices is taking a lot of time. So this is one of the ways by which the Java Flight Recorder can be used. And here you can see that the recording, once you view the contents of the recording, you can see that the values that have been printed. So in this case, the query parameters that you passed in the first case, as well as the query parameters you passed in the second case, these are basically being printed as well. So this is how one can use this particular feature or this particular API offered by the Java Flight Recorder. So this is about how one can use the event streaming API. So again, a popular feature as a part of the Java Flight Recorder. So that's it from my side. So again, I would like to mention that all the programs that have basically been tested using the JDK 16. So if one wants to leverage this, or one wants to build upon these examples, one can easily download them. I have mentioned the links to all the demo videos and the sample code. So please feel free to have a look at them and to basically leverage them in your own projects as well. So that is where I would say that you can actually try to put it into use in your projects. So yes, so there is always going to be a never ending debate about the fact that which framework to use, whether to use the Java Flight Recorder or to use any other logging framework. But here I would like to just mention that one should actually choose the approach that suits you. So if you are one of those developers who would like to monitor the production environment without using any kind of a logging mechanism, then definitely I would say that the Java Flight Recorder API can help you. Whereas if you want to continue using a Java logging framework, then of course there are so many other frameworks out there as well. So these are some of the references based on which I compiled my presentation today. And once again, I would like to thank the GeekCamp Singapore team for this excellent, I would say, giving us this excellent opportunity and this excellent, I would say, the whole concept of the GeekCamp really. So thank you so much to the entire team.
If you have any questions, please queue up at the blue steps footprints and then ask your question in the mic. If you like to write a written question, you can write it over in our Pigeonhole. You can find that link in the information box. I don't see any questions in Pigeonhole yet.
Okay. So if I can have 2 minutes. So actually, I also composed a small poem for the event. So if you can allow me 2 minutes, I could recite the poem as well.
I think that's fine.
Okay. So here goes. So this is something that I've come up with. A few years ago, when I first visited this island, I was amazed by the hospitality and the stories with which I was enlightened. They spoke about a country with cultural diversity, where people live happily with peace and prosperity. Be it the Maryland Park or the gardens by the bay, where the old spend time with each other while the young decide to play. A place where malls are ideal for a quick shopping spree, while foodies enjoy seafood at the famous Clark Key. From an aquarium to a zoo, this place has everything one can do. From the amazing conferences to tech events, each one can learn a thing or two. So the next time you plan a trip outdoor, please come and visit beautiful Singapore.
Oh my gosh, that's great. I love that. Oh, have you published it somewhere?
No.
I think a lot of people enjoy that. Okay, great. So if no one has any questions for Karan, I think let's just thank him again for his talk and his amazing poem. Other than that, let's before we go, a quick shout out to our contributors. So we have Chunkit, Michael, Jian, Harish, Thomas, and Christopher who have contributed to help make GeekCamp possible. And also our very special stream sponsor, ProLive, who have helped make this possible by providing the recordings and streamings to YouTube. And then finally, one more thing that Terence will cover.
Yeah, thanks, Ross. And it's been an amazing, I would say, 2-day session. Thank you for all of you, for joining us. Not just the speakers, especially so, and also with all of you, our attendees. On behalf of the committee here, we wanted to just say a huge thank you for making this event a huge success, right? Just before we kind of call it a day, right? It's coming to kind of midday here in Singapore. We'd like to ask for all of you who have joined us to give us a little bit of a feedback. This is the first time we're running this event on Gather Town. I know there are certain things that we are also trying to figure it out, right? In terms of technical difficulties, and we're trying to make the best out of what we can. Hopefully, in the next session we have in GeekCamp, we can make this an in-person event, which we are all familiar and used to. Like over the past 2 years, we all have been going onto this online platform, and we'd love to see how we can make this better. Hopefully we don't have to do this online platform next year. If we can all come in person, that would be ideal. But in any case, we'd love to see if there's any feedback from all of you. And please, if you can share your thoughts on what you enjoyed, even feedback about the sessions. If you want to have a direct feedback, on each of the sessions to the speakers, you can also share that with us here. We will be able to channel that feedback directly to all our speakers. So please, we look forward to hearing from all of you. Just a quick little shout out, right? If you guys are having fun with this platform, right, on Gather Town, the GMs, right, the game masters, or rather the organizers, have decided that, hey, you know what? We are going to open up the build administration to all of you shortly after, right, in the next couple of minutes. So you guys can actually experience being able to change this virtual world that you're in. You can build different things. You can figure out how you can add different elements and create your own virtual space, or so-called maybe the next meta of the new virtual space, right? So yeah, we will have that open shortly. You will see, once you refresh the page, say in the next 5 minutes, you will see a special tool, right, with a build looking icon. That's where you can actually make some changes to this space. So have some fun, right, playing around with this environment. So thank you for all of you once again for joining us. Otherwise, we look forward to seeing all of you. Look forward to having all your friends join us for next GeekCamp. Right, we used to have people attending our events in the hundreds and thousands. With online platforms today, we see many people decide to also join us via live recordings as well, which is also fine. But yeah, hopefully in the next GeekCamp, we get all of you to join us in a live event. Hopefully in person, you guys get to meet people and have fun, and yeah, get to make new friends as well. With that said, this is kind of the end of GeekCamp 2021, right? I hope you guys all had fun over the past 2 days. And have fun. This space will remain open, I would say, for the next, a few hours, till next year, right? It actually depends on when the place gets shut down. We don't really know when, but we shouldn't be. But feel free to just, use this link and come on and have fun. You can play around with the build stuff as well. Right? Otherwise, the GMs will hang around. The speakers, I believe, some of us are still around. Right? I see, we have a few of us still around here. So feel free to look out for us. In case you haven't figured out by now, you can actually right-click on the participants list and select this locate on map. You can find all of us. It will tell you where to find us, so you can actually look for us and talk to us as well. All right, thank you so much, and have a good rest of the afternoon.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good afternoon.
anybody is interested in doing purely functional